Some stories begin quietly on a cold night, in a crowded restaurant, where a woman in uniform stands alone and dignity hangs by a thread. No one helped the Japanese Admiral. No one even looked at her long enough to care. Until a humble single-dad janitor stepped forward, bowed like a soldier, and spoke to her in flawless Japanese. In that moment, 3 lives collided, and nothing that followed would remain ordinary. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt healing stories about kindness, second chances, and the quiet heroes walking among us, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us bring more uplifting stories to you every week, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Now, let's begin. The Silver Lantern had always been one of those places New Yorkers spoke about in soft, reverent tones, where the lighting was warm, but never dim, where every wine glass shone like it had been polished by angels, and where the city's well-dressed elite drifted in and out, as if carried by an invisible tide of privilege. On this cold March night, the restaurant glowed like a beacon against the misted windows and the busy streets outside. Waiters glided between tables. Soft jazz curled through the air. Everything was elegant. Everything was effortless, at least for those who belonged. Nakamura Aiko stood just inside the entrance, her breath still tight from the wind outside. Even in her formal Navy uniform, heavy with insignia and ribbons that represented a lifetime of service, she looked strangely out of place amid the chatter and clinking glasses. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, but her eyes dark, deep, sharply observant, held a quiet fatigue. To the American public, she was simply another dignitary traveling through the city. To those who served in the Pacific, she was a legend. But tonight, none of that mattered. The maître d'œil, a tall young man with slicked back hair and the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in his life, blocked her path with a polite but immovable smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "This establishment requires evening attire for all guests. We can't seat you in that." His eyes flicked toward her uniform, lingering not with admiration but disapproval. Behind Aiko, her daughter. Jenny, 26, graceful, dressed in a simple but striking red dress, stiffened. Her eyes widened with disbelief. "Excuse me," Jenny said sharply. "This is my mother's diplomatic uniform." But the maître d'œil only lifted his chin. Dress code is dress code. A whisper rippled through nearby tables. A few diners glanced over curious, but not curious enough to intervene. Most looked away, pretending not to see, hoping not to be involved. It was the kind of silence that carried judgment, not from cruelty, but from indifference. Aiko inhaled slowly through her nose. She was trained to withstand pressure, humiliation, the harsh winds of politics and military protocol. But there was something about being dismissed like this, quietly, coldly on foreign soil, that pierced deeper than she expected. "I see," she murmured. "If that is your rule, I will not argue." But her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for Jenny's hand. Across the room, a group of businessmen paused their conversation to watch. A couple whispered to each other. A server slowed down his steps, unsure whether he should offer help. And then, as if by unspoken agreement, the entire restaurant did what people often do. In uncomfortable moments, they stepped back, emotionally retreating into the safe distance of silence. No one helped. Jenny's voice cracked. "Mom, please, let's just go somewhere else. You shouldn't be treated like this." Her eyes glistened. The humiliation wasn't hers. Yet she felt it all the same. Aiko gave a faint, reassuring smile. "Jenny, it's all right. Not every place understands our ways." But in her chest, an old familiar ache stirred, the ache of carrying honor on shoulders, tired from decades of command. She turned toward the door, ready to leave quietly and preserve what dignity she could. And that was when a voice spoke behind her, gentle, warm, and unmistakably respectful. "Sumimasen, Taisho." "Excuse me, Admiral." The sound froze her in place. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple janitor's uniform, stepped forward from a discreet cleaning cart by the hallway. His long hair brushed his shoulders, and a trimmed beard softened what might otherwise have been a rugged face. His eyes were kind, steady, familiar, in a way Jenny couldn't explain. The restaurant fell silent again, but this time with confusion. The man stopped 3 steps from Aiko. Then, with remarkable grace, so smooth it felt like a memory pulled from another lifetime, he bowed. Deep. Precisely. Perfectly. Not an American attempt at politeness, not a tourist mimicry. A true bow. A bow of respect. A bow of understanding. The kind she had not seen outside Japan for many, many years. Aiko's breath caught. The janitor straightened slowly and spoke again in fluent, gentle Tokyo Japanese. "Taisho, if they will not honor your presence, allow me to offer mine." Jenny's mouth fell open. Even the maitre d' blinked, startled. Aiko stared at the stranger, struggling to reconcile the impossibility of what she was seeing. His accent. Perfect. His manner. Practiced. His eyes. Steady and sincere in a way she recognized deeply from soldiers who had endured things they never spoke about. "You speak Japanese," she whispered in English, her composure cracking slightly. The man smiled, not proudly, not shyly, but with a warmth that felt almost like an embrace. "I do," he replied softly, "and it's an honor to speak to you." Jenny leaned closer to her mother. "Mom, who is he?" Aiko didn't answer. She couldn't. The question echoed inside her in a way she didn't understand. There was something familiar about him, not his face, but the quiet heaviness in his gaze. The weight of someone who had carried too much too quietly for too long. Still, he extended his hand gently. "My name is Brandon Hayes. If you'll allow me, I can help you find a seat." But before Aiko could respond, the maitre d' stepped forward, agitated. "Sir, you have no authority." To Brandon turned to him, his voice still calm. "I'm not giving orders. I'm offering respect." Then he looked back at Aiko, his expression softening. No one deserves to be dismissed for honoring their country. The words were simple, but they struck something deep within her. Jenny swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "Mom, he's the only one who stood up for you." Aiko looked around the room once more, the silent tables, the averted eyes, the indifference, and then at the man who bowed like a soldier, remembering old vows. Something shifted inside her. For the first time that night, she did not feel alone. For a long second, the world inside the silver lantern seemed to pause, breath-held lights dimmed, conversations suspended in midair. It wasn't the kind of silence born from discomfort anymore. It was something else. A tension that felt almost ceremonial, as if history itself had walked through the door and chosen this moment, this place to exhale. Brandon Hayes remained standing in his gentle posture. The last notes of his bow still echoed in the weight of the air around him. It was a gesture so practiced, so fluid, so unmistakably Japanese, that even Jenny, raised in America, accustomed to the fast, casual rhythm of Western greetings, felt a shiver glide down her spine. Her mother, Admiral Nakamura Aiko, stared at him with the quiet intensity of someone who had spent her life reading battlefield maps, politics, and the silent truths in men's eyes. And in Brandon's eyes, she saw something she had not expected to find in this polished, indifferent room. Respect. Genuine, lived-in respect. "Brandon?" Aiko murmured. The name felt strange on her tongue, foreign yet spoken with a familiarity she did not understand. "How do you know our customs so well?" Before he could answer, the maitre d' stepped between them with stiff, forced professionalism. "Sir, you are a janitor here. You have duties to attend to. Please refrain from interacting with guests in this manner." Jenny shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "He isn't bothering us. You are." But Brandon lifted one hand, stopping her. "It's all right," he said calmly, like a man accustomed to being dismissed, accustomed to carrying burdens quietly, so others wouldn't have to. "He's just doing his job." The restraint in his voice struck Aiko harder than the maitre d's arrogance. This was a man who had learned to swallow humiliation without losing dignity, something every soldier, every commander, every survivor understood too well. Brandon turned back to the two women and switched languages again effortlessly. "Taisho, if you and your daughter need a table, please allow me to help," the maître d'hôtel sputtered. "You cannot just—" But the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man with gray at his temples and a far more seasoned sense of public relations, hurried over. He had heard the commotion, and more importantly, he had seen Jenny's expression as fierce as her mother's was composed. "Is everything all right here?" he asked carefully. Before Aiko could answer, Brandon spoke first, still soft, still respectful. "These ladies were denied seating due to dress code. I simply wish to offer assistance." The manager's jaw tightened. Aiko could read men well. He wasn't a bad man, just one who had not realized he was standing on the edge of an international embarrassment. Jenny stepped forward. "My mother is a foreign dignitary. That uniform represents decades of service and sacrifice, and she pointed at Brandon, was the only one who treated her with basic human decency." The manager's eyes flicked to Aiko's medals. Realization flooded his features. "My deepest apologies, Admiral," he said quickly. "We will seat you immediately. Please, right this way." But Aiko didn't move. She looked at Brandon. Something inside her, the part forged in naval academies, the part tempered by war, by loss, by the weight of command, felt compelled to acknowledge what had just happened. She had been dismissed by a room full of strangers, but lifted by a man no one even noticed. Her voice when she spoke was steady but warm. "Mr. Hayes, would you join us?" Brandon blinked. "Ma'am, I'm working." Jenny stepped beside him. "Just for a moment. Please." "You changed the whole night." Across the room, a few diners watched with growing curiosity. One of the businessmen from earlier nudged his companion. A couple whispered, and an elderly woman near the window smiled faintly, as if recognizing something in Brandon, a quiet nobility rarely found in polished surroundings. Brandon hesitated, not from fear, not from doubt, but from modesty so natural it felt like part of his skin. "If I take even a minute from my shift, the staff will have to cover for me." "Then let them," Jenny said, her voice gentler now. "Just this once." The manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, it's fine. Go ahead. We'll manage." Brandon exhaled slowly, nodding once. "Thank you." He didn't stride or swagger. He simply walked with the humble, steady grace of a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible in a world that often overlooked people like him. He guided Aiko and Jenny toward an empty table near a soft-lit corner, one of the best in the room. As they approached, Jenny noticed the small details, how Brandon pulled out Aiko's chair first, how he adjusted the angle of the lamp so the light wouldn't hit her eyes, how he placed the menu closer to her dominant hand. These weren't restaurant gestures. These were military habits, observant, tactical, quietly protective. When the three finally sat, Aiko clasped her hands in her lap, studying him. "Brandon Hayes," she said slowly. "You boo like you trained in Japan." Brandon's smile was faint, but honest. "I lived there for a time." Jenny leaned in, curiosity sparking. For work, Brandon hesitated again, the way someone hesitates. Not because they're hiding something shameful, but because they're deciding whether a truth deserves to be spoken aloud. "Something like that," he said gently. It was a long time ago. Aiko did not miss the flicker of pain behind his eyes. But before she could press further, a server approached with water. People watched from nearby tables, some discreetly, some openly. Not because the Admiral was here, but because the janitor who bowed was here. And yet Brandon behaved as though none of that mattered. He placed his napkin quietly on his lap, turned to Aiko, and spoke again in soft, Tokyo Japanese. You should never feel dishonored for wearing the uniform that shaped your life. Aiko inhaled sharply. Jenny felt her chest tighten. The restaurant felt suddenly too small to contain the weight of those words. Outside, the city continued its endless rush. But inside the silver lantern, something had shifted. 3 lives had touched for the first time, and none of them yet understood how deeply that touch would echo. The moment their chairs touched the polished floor of the silver lantern, something subtle but undeniable shifted between the 3 of them. It wasn't dramatic, not something the other patrons could name if asked later, but a quiet current, the kind that threads through the beginnings of stories that were never meant to stay ordinary. Brandon sat across from Admiral Nakamura Aiko and her daughter Jenny, with a gentle humility that felt almost out of place in the upscale restaurant. His janitor uniform made him stand out, but somehow seated before them he didn't look small. If anything, he looked grounded, like a man who had learned that dignity didn't come from fabric or rank, but from the weight of a person's choices. Aiko rested her palms lightly on the edge of the table, studying him with an attentiveness reserved for tactical briefings or difficult negotiations. Her daughter, meanwhile, couldn't stop stealing quiet glances at the man whose fluent Japanese and precise bow had unsettled the entire room. The server approached, tentatively placing menus before them. For you, Admiral, and for your daughter. And he hesitated, unsure what to call Brandon. Brandon rescued him with a small smile. For me as well. Thank you. The server nodded and hurried away, grateful. Aiko watched this exchange carefully. You handle people with unusual grace, Mr. Hayes. Brandon shook his head. People handle me. I just try not to make their jobs harder. Jenny tilted her head. That's not what we saw. You stood up for us, my mom especially, when no one else did. Brandon's gaze softened. I didn't stand up. I bowed. Aiko couldn't help it, her lips curved into a quiet smile. A minute ago, she had felt the sting of rejection, the loneliness of a foreigner dismissed in a room that knew nothing about her sacrifices. Now she felt seen, not for her rank, but for her humanity. May I ask, she said gently, where you learned those customs so precisely? Brandon traced a finger lightly along the edge of his water glass, as though grounding himself. I lived in Yokosuka for a while, he said, years back. Aiko's breath hitched. Yokosuka was more than a name, it was the soul of Japan's maritime alliance. It was where stories of sacrifice lived in the walls, whispered by ships carried by the tides. What did you do there? She asked. This time he didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted downward to the tablecloth, to the reflection of the overhead lights. The silence wasn't defensive. It was heavy, full of something unspoken. Work, he finally said, and things that didn't always feel like work. Jenny leaned back, her eyes narrowing, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. You sound like someone who doesn't talk about himself much. Brandon chuckled softly. Talking isn't one of my strengths. Then bowing is, she teased lightly. Something about her playful tone drew the first real smile from him, a small one, but genuine, warming the edges of his otherwise guarded face. The restaurant hummed around them, unaware of the delicate threads being woven across their small table. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the occasional burst of laughter, all of it faded into a kind of distant backdrop. But the quietness at their table was different. Not awkward, not strained. It was intimate. Aiko lifted her glass of water, taking a small sip. Mr. Hayes Brandon, he corrected gently. She nodded. Brandon. You didn't hesitate to help us. Why he considered this? I've seen people pushed aside, he said. Good people. People who gave everything only to be treated like they didn't matter. His voice lowered. I don't like watching that happen. Jenny's eyes softened. It happens to you, doesn't it? Brandon didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Aiko folded her hands, her gaze steady. In Japan, we call that kokoro no yami, the shadow of the heart. It grows from the things we carry alone. Brandon blinked, startled by her accuracy. I've carried my share, he admitted quietly. The moment hung between them like a fragile glass bell vibrating in still air. Jenny cleared her throat gently, wanting to ease the heaviness. Well, my mom and I should thank you properly. You changed everything tonight. You don't have to thank me, Brandon said. But we want to, Jenny insisted. Don't tell us how to feel. She sounded exactly like a commander's daughter. Aiko's lips twitched. Brandon, she said, tone shifting to soft command, would you consider joining us at this table? For more than just a moment, he looked almost overwhelmed by the offer. I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding, Aiko said firmly. You're invited. Brandon inhaled slowly, and something in his shoulders eased, as if he'd been bracing for rejection long before he took his seat. All right, he said. I'll stay. For a little while, Jenny broke into a small, relieved smile. Aiko straightened, newfound steadiness settling into her bones. Then let this evening be one of good company, she said. Not rank, not uniforms, just people meeting at the right moment. Brandon nodded. I'd like that. And for the first time in years, perhaps longer, Aiko felt a rare sensation wash over her. Peace. Jenny felt something too, a quiet spark flickering somewhere behind her ribs, subtle but warm, unexpected, and dangerously easy to welcome. Across the restaurant, the maître d' watched the scene unfold with narrowing eyes, but he said nothing. The tide had turned, and there was no stemming it now. Not tonight. Not with these three lives intersecting in ways none of them yet understood. Brandon reached for his glass. So, what were you two celebrating? Jenny opened her mouth to answer, but Aiko placed her hand gently on her daughter's. We weren't celebrating, the Admiral said softly. We were simply trying to have dinner. She looked at Brandon. And thanks to you, we now can. Dinner service picked up around them, servers weaving between tables, plates clinking softly, conversations blooming like little pockets of warmth across the silver lantern. But at the corner table where Brandon Hayes sat with Admiral Nakamura Aiko and her daughter Jenny, time seemed to move differently. Slower. Heavier. As if waiting for something to surface. For a while, the three of them talked lightly about the weather, about cultural differences, about New York's unpredictable charm. Jenny told a quick story about getting lost on the subway during her first week in the city, and Brandon laughed the sound, deep but gentle, like a memory stirring. But beneath the easy conversation lay an unspoken tension, a sense that something important sat just beneath the surface of their meeting. Jenny felt it first. She watched Brandon carefully, the way he held his glass, like someone trained to control every gesture, the way his eyes tracked exits and angles, unconsciously, the way he never seemed to fully relax into his chair. These weren't habits of a janitor, not even close. When their server stepped away to place their entree orders, Jenny leaned a little closer to Brandon and lowered her voice. Can I ask you something? A bit odd, Brandon blinked, surprised but not dismissive. Sure. Jenny hesitated for half a heartbeat, then said, Do you remember the explosion at Naha Port? About 6 years ago, Aiko froze. Brandon's fingers tightened around his glass so subtly that most people wouldn't have noticed, but Jenny saw it. Saw the ripple of something old and sharp flash through his eyes. He didn't speak. Not yet. Jenny kept her voice soft. My mother was stationed nearby. She's told me parts of it, enough to know it was bad. Brandon's throat worked, as if he were trying to swallow down a memory. Aiko finally turned to face him fully, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just bad. We lost men that night. Good men. Her eyes drifted slightly unfocused, recalling smoke chaos alarms screaming across the harbor. And someone, she continued, someone not Japanese, pulled 6 of my sailors out of the fire. Pulled them through debris no one else dared enter. A breath trembled in her chest, though her posture remained perfectly straight. We never found him. He disappeared before we could reach him. Brandon stared down at the tablecloth. Jenny felt her heartbeat quicken. Mom, she said softly when he bowed earlier. When he spoke Japanese, it felt like... She looked at Brandon again. Like we've seen that before. Aiko nodded slowly. Yes. Brandon exhaled a long, steady breath that sounded far too heavy for a simple memory. I was there, he said quietly. His voice was steady, but the quietness in it made Jenny's skin prickle. Aiko's hands tightened into fists in her lap. She didn't breathe. Jenny didn't blink. Brandon continued, eyes distant. I wasn't supposed to be in the port. I was delivering supply crates a few miles away. Just a routine run. I heard the explosion from the shoreline. By the time I got there, the flames were too high. People were running, screaming. The smoke was... He shook his head lightly, thick enough to choke the sky. Jenny whispered, So what did you do? Brandon didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He simply told the truth. I went in. Silence clamped around the table like an invisible hand. Aiko's lips parted, but no sound came out. Jenny leaned closer. Breath caught. You just went into the fire. There were voices, Brandon said. I could hear men trapped. I didn't think, I just moved. Aiko finally found her voice, though it trembled. You carried them. Brandon nodded. The first 2 were conscious. The others weren't. Jenny covered her mouth. Aiko swallowed hard. Her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with the fierce, quiet grief of a commander who still carried the ghosts of fallen soldiers. Why didn't you stay? She asked. Why didn't you let us thank you? Brandon's gaze dropped. I wasn't supposed to be involved. Civilians aren't meant to be anywhere near military rescue operations. I didn't want to complicate things. And He paused, struggling with the next words. I wasn't in a place in my life where recognition felt right. Aiko stared at him, stunned. Jenny reached out instinctively, placing her hand near his on the table, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her presence. You saved their lives, she whispered. 6 people. 6 families. Brandon didn't flinch at praise. Instead, he looked almost ashamed. I didn't save everyone. His gaze dimmed. 1 man didn't make it. Aiko closed her eyes. She knew exactly who he meant. She remembered holding the young sailor's hand as he slipped away hours later in the medic bay, the smell of smoke still clinging to his hair. His family never blamed you, she said softly. They thanked the unknown rescuer for giving them a chance to say goodbye. Brandon looked up, then a flicker of pain loosening its grip on his face. Aiko inhaled deeply, her composure cracking at the edges. All these years, I searched for you. Brandon's eyes widened. Jenny placed a hand on her mother's arm. She wasn't searching for a hero. She was searching for the man who did what no one else could do. Aiko's next words were barely audible. And now, here you sit, as a janitor, bowing to me in a restaurant. Brandon's expression softened. Rank doesn't matter to me. People matter. Aiko pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Jenny felt her heart twist. This man sitting in worn shoes and a faded uniform had done something most people never would, and he carried it like a burden, not a badge. Aiko finally spoke, voice thick with restrained emotion. "Brandon Hayes, you saved part of my command. You saved my people." Brandon bowed his head once more. It was the right thing to do. And in that moment, amid clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and warm restaurant lights, the truth settled over them like a quiet revelation. Their lives had not intersected by chance. Something far deeper was at work. Something that would change all three of them forever. The restaurant had regained its rhythm, the clinking of plates, the low hum of conversations, the soft spill of jazz from the speakers. But at the corner table where Brandon, Aiko, and Jenny sat, the air held a different tone. It was layered now thick with unveiled truth and the kind of silence that follows after something sacred has been spoken aloud. Aiko hadn't touched her water since Brandon finished recounting the night at Naha Port. Her fingers rested lightly on the glass, but her mind was somewhere far away back in the burning docks, back in the smoke. Back in the moment she had prayed for a miracle she never knew had arrived. Jenny sat closer to Brandon. Now, not physically, there was still respectable distance between them, but emotionally undeniably. Her eyes kept drifting toward him with a softness she didn't even try to hide. Admiration, gratitude, and something else budding quietly beneath them. Brandon, however, seemed unaware. Or perhaps he simply refused to believe he deserved such regard. Before any of them could speak again, footsteps approached, fast, sharp, irritated. The maître d' appeared at their table like a cold draft. His expression was tight, his jaw clenched, and the way he held his hands behind his back made him look like an amateur officer trying to mimic authority. "Mr. Hayes," he said sharply, ignoring the two women entirely. "I need to have a word with you." "Now." Brandon blinked, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "No," the maître d' snapped. "It absolutely is not. You were not authorized to engage with guests, and you certainly were not authorized to seat them." Jenny's brows shot up. "Seat them?" "He didn't seat us. You refused to seat us." The maître d' continued as if she hadn't spoken. "This establishment has rules, standards, and clearly you have overstepped every one of them tonight." Aiko's eyes narrowed, her calm demeanor instantly sharpening into something far more commanding. "Young man," she said quietly, "you are speaking to the wrong person." But he didn't even glance her way. Instead, he lifted a small, folded slip of paper. "Mr. Hayes," he said curtly, "consider this your termination notice, effective immediately." Jenny shot to her feet so fast her chair nearly toppled. "What, you're firing him for helping us?" "That's absurd." The maître d' stiffened. "Miss, please sit down. I am handling internal staff matters." Jenny's voice cracked with outrage. "No, you're humiliating a good man in front of us because he made you look small." A hush swept across nearby tables. People sensed a real moment unfolding, something raw and unpolished, breaking through the restaurant's curated perfection. Brandon stood slowly steadying his palm on the table's edge as he rose. "It's all right, Jenny," he said softly. Then he turned to the maître d's shoulders, straight tone, calm and even. "If that is your decision, I'll respect it." The maître d' blinked, surprised by the lack of resistance, perhaps even disappointed bullies often were when denied a fight. Aiko stood next, her posture transformed instantly from dignified civilian to commanding admiral, a shift so sharp the maître d' instinctively stepped back. "You will retract that notice," she said quietly. I beg your pardon," he stammered. "You heard me." Her voice was soft, but it had the weight of oceans behind it. This man is under my protection. You will not punish him for displaying honor. The maitre d' swallowed hard. Admiral, with respect, this is a private business. I have every right to. But Aiko raised one hand, stopping him. And then she turned not to the maitre d', but to Brandon. Brandon, she said, her voice shifting from authoritative to profoundly human. Do you wish to stay at this job? If you do, I will ensure you keep it. Jenny held her breath. Brandon smiled, small, weary, and entirely genuine. Aiko, he said softly, you don't need to fight for me. But you deserve fairness, Jenny insisted. He shook his head. I've been treated unfairly before. It doesn't define me. Aiko's eyes glistened, not with pity, but with anger on his behalf. Then allow me to make this right. Brandon's smile warmed, even in the face of humiliation. You already did, he said quietly. You listened. Jenny felt her throat tighten. The maitre d' regained a sliver of confidence. Mr. Hayes, please return your staff badge at the front desk before you leave. Aiko took a step forward, her voice low and icy, something deep and resolute rising from the part of her that once commanded fleets. You would fire the man who saved my sailors, who honored me when an entire room looked away. The maitre d' went pale, but Brandon placed a gentle hand on her arm, stopping her. Don't, he said quietly. He doesn't know, and he doesn't need to. Aiko looked at him, really looked at him, and saw in his eyes the same selflessness she had seen on countless soldiers under her command, a willingness to take blows quietly so others wouldn't suffer. Jenny stood beside her mother. Brandon, please, let us help. He offered them both a soft, grateful exhale. You helped me more than you know, he said. But I don't belong in places like this. Not tonight. Not anymore. He folded the termination slip with care, almost tenderness, and placed it back on the maitre d's tray. It's all right, Brandon said again. I'll be fine. And then he smiled, gentle, humble, heartbreakingly proud. Don't worry about me. I'm used to starting over. Jenny felt something inside her crack, a small, fragile place that had never broken before. Aiko's throat tightened. Her voice came out in a whisper, not meant for anyone but him. No one should have to be used to that. Brandon bowed his head respectfully, the same way he had bowed when they first met. Aiko bowed back. Jenny's breath caught, and the maitre d', stunned into silence, watched a moment he was utterly unworthy of witnessing. Brandon straightened his pride, untouched, his dignity unbroken. Thank you for the company, he said softly. It meant more than you know. Then, with a quiet grace that contrasted painfully with the cruelty he had just endured, he stepped away from the table. He didn't look defeated. He didn't look bitter. He looked free. For several long seconds, after Brandon walked away, the world around Admiral Nakamura Aiko and her daughter Jenny seemed suspended, hanging by a thread between outrage and disbelief. The maitre d', pale and rattled, retreated with the termination slip as though it were a live fuse, leaving behind a vacuum of silence that swallowed the restaurant's polished elegance whole. Aiko remained standing. Jenny too. But the absence of Brandon, his quiet strength, the calm he carried like a hidden shield, left an unexpected stillness in the air, as if a vital current had been cut. Aiko drew a slow breath, steadying herself. Years of naval command flowed back into her spine. Discipline, clarity, purpose. She turned to Jenny, and her daughter saw it instantly. The shift, the resolve. Mother Jenny whispered. Aiko's voice was low, firm, carrying the weight of a woman who had spent her life making decisions that shaped the lives of others. He should not have been punished for showing honor, she said. Not in my presence. Not after what he has done. Jenny nodded, throat tight. He didn't deserve that. Not even a little. But beneath her indignation was something softer. Fear that Brandon might disappear as quickly as he'd appeared. Aiko gently touched her daughter's shoulder. "Come," she said. "We're going to speak with him." They left their table and stepped through the dining room. People watched. Some pretending not to, others openly staring as the Admiral moved with silent authority toward the hallway where Brandon had disappeared. Near the staff corridor, they spotted him turning in his badge to the older restaurant manager. Brandon stood with his back to them, posture humble shoulders, squared not in defiance, but in acceptance. The manager spoke quietly, apologetic it seemed, but Brandon simply nodded with that same gentle restraint that marked every gesture he made. Jenny's heart clenched. Aiko approached with the steady determination of a commander addressing a decorated soldier rather than a man in a janitor's uniform. "Brandon," she said. He turned, and even though everything inside him seemed to brace for another reprimand, his expression softened immediately when he saw them. "Aiko." "Jenny." He gave a small nod. "I didn't expect you to come back here." Jenny stepped forward, unable to hide the emotion rising in her voice. "You shouldn't leave without hearing us out." Brandon smiled faintly. "There's nothing to hear. These things happen. People in my position, well, we're easy to replace." Aiko's eyes sharpened. "That is untrue." The manager cleared his throat. "Admiral, if I may." She raised a single hand. He fell silent. Aiko faced Brandon, her posture, straight, her voice steady but warm. "Mr. Hayes, Brandon, your years of service, your sacrifice, your courage during the Naha port disaster, these are not the actions of a man who is easy to replace. They are the actions of a man nations depend on." Brandon's breath caught. Jenny swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "My mom doesn't say things like that lightly." Aiko stepped closer, her eyes holding his with an intensity that pierced deeper than authority. It carried gratitude long overdue. "You saved my people," she said. "My sailors. My command. And now tonight you protected my dignity when everyone else remained silent." She paused. "No man like that should ever walk away thinking he is small." Brandon looked down, overwhelmed. "How did you carry so much honor into a place like this?" she asked gently. He exhaled. "Habit. Maybe hope." His smile was small, but it held truth. People don't expect much from a janitor. Sometimes that makes it easy to surprise them. Jenny stepped beside her mother. "You didn't just surprise us," she said softly. "You changed everything." Brandon's gaze drifted to her, warm, searching, then quickly pulled back as though he feared seeing too much. Aiko continued. "Brandon, before you return home, I want you to hear something." She drew herself up to full height, not as a woman wronged, but as an admiral recognizing a warrior. "In my culture, in my service, in my command, we honor those who protect us. You may no longer wear a uniform, but the spirit of a soldier lives in you still." Brandon stared at her, stunned. "You are not a man defined by the broom in your hand," Aiko said. "You are defined by the battles you've braved, by the lives you've saved." Jenny felt tears sting her eyes at the certainty, the reverence in her mother's tone. She added softly, "We want you to know. You mattered to us tonight." Brandon blinked rapidly, looking away for a moment, just enough time for the emotion to settle before he faced them again. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. Aiko reached out, placing a steady hand on his forearm. "You do not need to say anything," she said. "Simply know this Japan owes you a debt of gratitude, and I owe you something far more personal." Brandon looked at her, brows furrowed. "What's that?" Aiko's voice softened into something he had not expected, something almost maternal. My trust. The words hit him harder than any recognition she could have offered. No one trusted him like that. No one had for years. Jenny stepped closer, her voice warm. "And my thanks," she added gently. Brandon breathed in slowly, deeply, as if grounding himself in a moment he never thought he would be worthy of. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, raw. "Thank you," he said. "Both of you. Tonight meant more than you know." Aiko nodded. It meant something to us, too. The moment felt like a bridge, 3 lives, connecting not through coincidence, but through the quiet recognition of souls carrying old wounds, old sacrifices, old hopes. Brandon straightened, a newfound steadiness settling into him. "I'll walk you back to your table," he said softly. Aiko smiled. "No," she replied. "Tonight we walk with you." And together, the 3 of them left the dim hallway, not as a janitor, an admiral, and her daughter, but as people whose paths had crossed for a reason none of them yet understood. The 3 of them walked back toward the dining area together, Brandon in the center, Aiko on his left, Jenny on his right, an arrangement that felt unplanned, yet strangely natural. The restaurant's soft lights brushed their shoulders, and diners turned to watch as a quiet procession moved across the polished floor. No one spoke, yet something unspoken knit the air around them with warmth and gravity. When they reached their table, Brandon hesitated. "I shouldn't sit," he murmured. "You two should finish your dinner," without Jenny gently touched his sleeve. "You are sitting," she said with unmistakable resolve. "You are our guest now." Aiko nodded firmly. "Please." Brandon hesitated for only another breath before lowering himself into the chair he had occupied earlier. Aiko and Jenny sat as well, mirroring his movements with grace. But now the closeness between them felt different, less like strangers, meeting by chance, more like companions, sharing a moment shaped by fate. A fresh pot of tea arrived steaming softly. The server set 3 cups before them. "For you," he whispered almost reverently. Perhaps he had overheard. Or perhaps he simply sensed the shift in atmosphere. Brandon poured the tea with a calm, deliberate precision that made Aiko smile. "You've done that before," she said in Japanese. He nodded. In Yokosuka, tea was often shared between shifts, a way to breathe again before returning to duty. Jenny watched him, her expression softening with every detail she discovered. They each lifted their cups, letting the warmth settle into their hands. The conversation that followed did not come immediately. Instead, a quiet understanding filled the space between them. It was Jenny who finally broke the silence. "Brandon, may I ask something personal?" His brow lifted slightly. "You can ask." Jenny hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Earlier, when you talked about Naha Port, the way you spoke, it sounded like someone who has lived with that night for a long time." Brandon stared down at the tea, watching the steam drift upward, like memories escaping the past. "It's not a story I tell," he said finally. "Not because I'm hiding it, just because some memories feel heavier when spoken aloud." Aiko understood this far too well. "In my line of work, we say some wounds heal only when they are carried together," she said softly. Brandon gave a small, almost fragile smile. "I've always tried not to burden anyone." Jenny leaned forward. "You're not a burden. Not to us." He looked up, meeting her eyes, and something shifted. Jenny felt it sudden and quiet, like a breeze slipping through a half-opened window. Not romance, not yet. Something gentler. Recognition. Respect. The beginnings of a bond that neither of them had expected. Aiko placed her hands together gently. "You spoke of your past earlier," she said. "You mentioned losing someone." Brandon's shoulders tightened. Jenny instantly regretted her mother's directness, but Aiko gave her a small, reassuring glance before continuing. "I know what it looks like when grief sits in a man's posture," Aiko said. "When sorrow shapes the way he breathes." Brandon exhaled slowly, a tremor moving through it. "My wife," he said. Just 2 words, but they hung in the air with the weight of a full confession. Jenny's hand drifted to her chest. "Brandon, I'm so sorry." He nodded gratefully. "She passed 4 years ago. Illness. Quick. Unfair." He swallowed hard. "I didn't handle it well? Not at first." Aiko softened. "Few people do." Brandon continued, voice steady but quiet. "My daughter was 6 at the time. She needed me to be strong. And I tried. I took whatever jobs I could find. Day shifts, night shifts. 3 at once sometimes." His gaze dropped. "That's how I ended up here." Jenny blinked. 3 jobs, because of medical bills. Brandon didn't answer outright, but the silence was answer enough. Aiko clasped her hands tightly. "In Japan, we honor the caregiver. A single parent who sacrifices everything is seen as a pillar of strength." Brandon's smile was faint, but grateful. America sees it too. Sometimes. But it's easy to slip through the cracks. Jenny felt her throat tighten. "So you do all this?" "Alone," he nodded. "My daughter and I, we manage. She's the strong one, braver than I ever was. I try to give her what stability I can." "And the house?" Aiko asked gently. "Earlier you mentioned losing it." Brandon looked away. "If I miss one more payment, the bank will take it." Jenny's eyes stung. "Does your daughter know?" "No." His voice firmed. "I won't let her worry about something she can't fix." A small silence followed, warm but heavy with reverence for the man who sat before them. Then Aiko spoke, her tone filled with quiet awe. "You remind me of the young men I commanded," she said. "Brave, selfless, always carrying more weight than they admit." Brandon shook his head gently. "I'm just trying to keep my daughter safe." Aiko leaned forward. "Brandon Hayes," she said softly, "you are more than you believe yourself to be. More than anyone has given you credit for." Jenny nodded, tears bright in her eyes. "You're a good man, a strong man." Brandon looked at them both, emotion flickering behind his steady gaze. "I don't know why tonight unfolded the way it did," he whispered. "But I'm grateful it brought me to this table." Aiko smiled, warm, maternal, almost protective. "As am I." Jenny felt something bloom in her chest, something warm, hopeful, unfamiliar. Across the restaurant the night moved on. People laughed, glasses clinked, stories continued. But at their table 3 wounded hearts began to knit silently together, the first threads of healing weaving tighter with each exchanged breath. Beneath the surface, past scars and quiet grief stirred, but no longer alone, no longer unspoken, no longer carried in isolation. For the first time in a long time, Brandon felt something he thought he had lost forever. Belonging. For a while the table remained wrapped in a calm, tender quiet, a kind of peace that didn't demand words. Outside the silver lantern's tall windows, the New York night deepened the city lights, blurring into soft halos as gentle mist drifted past. Inside, warm light pooled over white linens and polished flatware, creating small pockets of intimacy in the otherwise bustling room. But something restless stirred under the surface. Jenny felt it first, an awareness, subtle but insistent, that the night had reached a turning point. She watched Brandon's posture, the way he held himself slightly inward, as though preparing for something he didn't want to name. She saw the flicker in her mother's gaze, too, an instinct sharpened over decades of leadership. Both women sensed that this fragile calm wouldn't last. Aiko was the one who spoke first. "Brandon," she said gently, What will you do now, tonight, I mean? He shrugged with soft resignation. I'll go home. My daughter will be asleep by now. I'll check on her, tidy up a bit, maybe prepare her lunch for school tomorrow. And tomorrow morning, Aiko pressed. Well, he said quietly, I'll look for another job. Jenny's heart clenched. He said it so simply, as though losing his livelihood were merely a shift in weather. No bitterness, no anger, just quiet acceptance. Aiko set down her cup, her gaze firm. You were fired unjustly. Brandon shook his head. It's all right. No, Jenny said sharply. It's not. Before he could reply, Aiko rose slowly from her chair, graceful, dignified, every movement precise. Her presence drew the attention of nearby tables. Even the soft music seemed to hush in subtle anticipation. Brandon Hayes, she said, turning not to him first, but toward the front of the restaurant. The maitre d' stiffened instantly. Admiral Thoreau. But she lifted her hand, silencing him. This establishment owes you an apology, she said, her voice calm, but edged with unmistakable authority. You dismissed a man who acted with honor. You attempted to strip dignity from someone who displayed more grace in a moment of conflict than this entire room combined. People at nearby tables exchanged startled glances. The maitre d' swallowed hard color draining from his face. Jenny rose beside her mother, chin lifted. You should be ashamed. He showed more respect and courage in 5 minutes than most people show in a lifetime. The maitre d' stammered. I didn't know. Aiko cut him off gently but firmly. That is precisely the problem. You saw a uniform and made assumptions, yet you failed to see the man. She stepped closer, her gaze sharp but controlled. You fired him publicly. You humiliated him. And you will correct that mistake publicly as well. A small ripple of tension moved through the restaurant. The maitre d' straightened, panic flickering in his eyes. Admiral, of course, we will reinstate him immediately. But before he could finish, Brandon rose from his seat. Aiko, he said softly, please. She turned to face him. He shook his head gently. I appreciate what you're doing. More than you know. But I don't want that job back. Aiko blinked in surprise. Jenny stared at him. Brandon? Are you sure? He nodded. I don't want to return to a place that treated me with so little respect, and I don't want anyone forced to take me back out of fear or pressure. The maitre d' deflated with relief, but Aiko's expression sharpened again. Brandon, she said, voice low. I am offering to restore your dignity. He smiled softly, the kind of smile that held years of quiet battles. You didn't restore it, he said. You reminded me I still had it. Those words struck Aiko harder than any reprimand ever had. She held his gaze, and in that moment, she saw not the janitor before her, but the soldier from 6 years ago, carrying men through flame and smoke, with no expectation of reward. Then came the twist. Aiko stepped forward, looking into Brandon's eyes. I wish to offer something more. Mom, Jenny whispered, sensing the shift. Aiko continued. I want this evening not the humiliation, not the dismissal, but the truth to belong to us, to our table, not to this restaurant's judgment. She turned back toward the maitre d'. We will pay for the meal, but the remainder of this evening is no longer under your authority. The maitre d' nodded rapidly. Yes, Admiral. Of course. But Aiko wasn't done. She turned to Brandon again, her voice gentling. I want to honor you, Brandon. Tonight. Not because of your past, but because of the man you are. Brandon stared at her, unsure, humbled, moved. How he murmured. Aiko drew a breath. By giving you a choice, she said softly. Jenny leaned closer, listening. Aiko stepped toward the maitre d' again. I want the bill moved to my name. And I want everything that follows dessert drinks service handled by the senior staff only. This is my dinner." The maitre d's eyes widened, but he nodded. Then Aiko delivered her twist. But she said, turning back to Brandon, "It is also your dinner." Brandon blinked. "What do you mean?" Aiko smiled gently. "You are not here as an employee. You are here as an honored guest." Jenny's breath caught. The maitre d' froze, stunned, but Brandon simply shook his head slowly. "Aiko, I can't accept that." "You can," she said softly, "because you deserve it." He hesitated, perhaps out of humility, perhaps out of disbelief, but the moment shifted again when Jenny touched his arm lightly. "Brandon," she whispered, "let us do this. For you." His shoulders softened, and for the first time that night, he looked not like a man carrying the world, but like a man momentarily allowed to set it down. "All right," he said quietly. "Then I accept." Aiko nodded, once a gesture filled with reverence. Jenny released a small breath, half relief, half emotion. And there, in the glowing lights of the silver lantern, something profound unfolded. A man who had been dismissed was now dignified. A man who had been underestimated was now honored. And a man who had spent years believing he deserved little was now shown how wrong he was. The dinner plates had long been cleared away, replaced by warm cups of green tea and the soft glow of table candles. The silver lantern's atmosphere had shifted as the night deepened. Conversations grew quieter, laughter more mellow, and the polished elegance dimmed into a gentler warmth. Yet the truest warmth in the room pooled at the corner table, where three lives once strangers now sat, intertwined by circumstance and something deeper. For the first time since Brandon had sat down, he seemed to breathe more freely. His shoulders loosened, no longer pinned by the weight of humiliation or old memories. Across from him, Jenny watched with a tenderness she didn't attempt to hide. To her right, Aiko observed the scene with the calm, steady gaze of a woman who had commanded fleets, but was now witnessing something far more delicate, the quiet unfolding of trust. "Tell us about her," Jenny said softly. Brandon looked up, caught off guard. "Who, your daughter?" she replied. "You told us how strong she is. I'd like to know more." A slow, genuine smile touched his features, brightening him in a way that chased away the shadows lingering around his eyes. "Well," he began, settling back in his chair. "Her name is Emma. She's 10, loves drawing, hates broccoli, insists that superheroes are real, but only the ones who don't know they're heroes." Jenny's smile grew. "Smart girl." "She is," Brandon said, pride warming his tone. "She has this way of noticing things, little things most people never see. She used to ask me why I looked sad sometimes, even when I thought I was hiding it. I finally told her the truth, that grown-ups can hurt on the inside, even if no one can see the wound." Jenny's eyes softened. "Kids understand more than we think." Aiko nodded. "My daughter was the same, too perceptive for her own good." Jenny nudged her mother gently. "Mom saw everything. I couldn't get away with anything growing up." Aiko's lips curved. "That is because you tried to get away with everything." Brandon laughed, a deep, warm sound that felt like the first crack of light at the end of a long winter. He turned back to Aiko. "And you? What was Jenny like as a child?" Aiko's expression softened in a way few outside her inner circle had witnessed. "Determined," she said. "Independent. Brave. She once climbed the radio tower at our base just to see the ocean from higher ground. And terrified 3 separate commanding officers in the process." Jenny groaned. Mom Brandon grinned. "Sounds like she's always had spirit." "She still does," Aiko said. Jenny felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the warmth spreading across the table. It felt strange, this ease between them, natural, unforced, like a family gathering formed by fate instead of blood. A quiet lull fell between them, comfortable, reflective. Brandon took a slow sip of his tea, his gaze drifting toward the window, where droplets of mist clung to the glass. "It's been a long time," he said quietly, "since I've had a night like this. Good company. Good conversation. Not rushing from one shift to the next." "You deserve nights like this," Jenny said. He looked at her eyes, softening. "Maybe. But life doesn't always give you what you deserve. Sometimes," Aiko said, "it gives you what you need." Brandon nodded, absorbing her words. Jenny leaned forward slightly. "Brandon, what do you want? Not for your daughter, not out of duty, just for you." He blinked, surprised by the question. He paused. "I don't think anyone's asked me that in years." "Maybe it's time someone did," she said gently. Brandon exhaled, long and thoughtful. "I want peace," he said finally. "A place where my daughter feels safe. A job that doesn't strip my dignity. A life that doesn't feel like I'm always fighting uphill." Jenny nodded. "You deserve all of that." Aiko studied him for a moment, the wheels of command turning quietly behind her eyes. "Brandon," she said softly, "your resilience is remarkable. Many men would have succumbed to bitterness. But you—" "I don't have the luxury of bitterness," he replied. "It wouldn't feed my daughter." Aiko's expression tightened, not with judgment, but admiration. Jenny's eyes glistened. She wasn't sure when it had begun, this slow, quiet unfolding inside her, but every word Brandon spoke seemed to weave threads between them, stitching something fragile and meaningful. Aiko sensed it too, but she didn't interrupt. Instead, she reached for a small dessert spoon and stirred her tea thoughtfully. "There is something else I must say," she murmured. "Both of you should hear it." Jenny straightened. Mom Aiko set down the spoon, her expression solemn yet warm. "We are 3 people tonight who carry wounds others cannot see," she said. "But wounds do not frighten me. They tell me that a person has lived, that they've risked themselves for something greater." She looked at Brandon. "You carry deep wounds. Yet when faced with humiliation, you chose dignity. When faced with strangers in need, you chose compassion. And when confronted with injustice, you chose humility over anger." Brandon lowered his gaze. Aiko continued. "You remind me of the men I trusted most, the ones who never sought recognition, only the chance to do what was right." Jenny swallowed, emotion swelling in her chest. "And that," Aiko said quietly, "is why you are no ordinary man." Brandon's voice broke slightly. "I'm just trying to do my best." "Yes," Jenny whispered. "And that's what makes you extraordinary." For a long moment, the 3 of them simply breathed together, 3 hearts, 3 burdens easing, opening, aligning in quiet understanding. Outside, the city lights shimmered, reflected in the window, like faint constellations. Inside, something far more precious had begun to take shape. Not romance, not yet. Not obligation. Not gratitude alone. Something gentler. Something warmer. A healing that started not with grand gestures, but with simple presence. Their hearts, once bruised and guarded, had begun slowly, tenderly to heal. The night at the Silver Lantern had thinned like the last ember of a fading candle. Servers moved more slowly, voices softened, and table after table began to empty as customers drifted into the misty New York darkness outside. But at the corner table, the world lingered, wrapped in the warmth of shared stories, the glow of teacups, and the fragile threads of newfound connection. Brandon sat relaxed for the first time in what felt like years. The tension along his shoulders had eased, replaced with a quiet, almost disbelieving calm. He no longer looked like the man who had been fired earlier that evening. He looked like someone rediscovering the idea that he deserved a seat at a table, not out of charity, but out of earned respect. Aiko watched him with a steady, thoughtful gaze. Something had been forming in her mind, shifting, shaping, solidifying as the night unfolded. Jenny sensed it even if she couldn't yet name it. Her mother's expression had changed, taking on the focused intensity of a commander, weighing a decision that could alter the course of lives. When the server refilled their tea and moved away, Aiko folded her hands gracefully. "Brandon," she began. "I have something important to discuss with you." Brandon lifted his gaze, curious. "What is it?" Aiko chose her next words with care. "You speak Japanese fluently. You understand our customs, our etiquette, our values. You have lived among us. You have served beside us more honorably than many who wore the uniform." He looked startled. "Aiko." She raised a hand gently. "Let me finish." Jenny leaned forward, anticipation bright in her eyes. Aiko continued. "There is a position opening soon at the U.S.-Japan Military Cultural Exchange Division. It is a small department, but a vital one responsible for bridging communication training and cultural understanding between our forces." Brandon stared, unsure where this was going. "You would assist with language coordination," Aiko explained, "liaison tasks, and cross-cultural consultations. It is stable work, respected work, and work for which your skills are uniquely suited." Brandon blinked, once, twice. Aiko, I'm a janitor." "No," she said firmly. "You are a man who knows our language, our traditions, our world. And you carry yourself as someone who has seen hardship and yet chooses kindness. That, Brandon, is not something that can be taught. It is lived." Jenny nodded eagerly. "Mom's right. You'd be amazing at that." Brandon shook his head, still overwhelmed. "I haven't held a real position in years. My resume is patchwork. My life is complicated." Aiko met his eyes, her voice calm and unyielding. "Every strong man has a complicated life." He looked away, unsure whether to laugh or break. Jenny leaned closer, her voice soft but certain. "You deserve more than survival, Brandon. You deserve a chance at a real future. A better life. Not just for your daughter, for you." He swallowed, emotion thickening in his throat. "It sounds too good to be real." Aiko offered a gentle smile. "It is real. And the position is mine to recommend. If I put your name forward, it will be taken seriously." Brandon shook his head again. "Why me?" Aiko breathed deeply, her words deliberate. "Because I recognize something in you. The same courage I saw in my sailors, the same sense of duty, the same dignity." She paused. "And because you saved the lives of my men, perhaps fate is giving me a chance to return the favor." Brandon's chest tightened. "Aiko, I didn't save them to be repaid." She nodded. "And that is exactly why you deserve the opportunity." The table fell into a soft hush. Brandon looked from Aiko to Jenny and back again. "I don't know if I can do it. What if I'm not enough?" "You are enough," Jenny said instantly. Her voice trembled with sincerity, and when Brandon looked at her, he found something in her eyes he hadn't expected: belief. Pure, unwavering belief. Aiko reinforced it quietly. "You will not walk that path alone. There will be training, support, guidance. What matters is your heart, and yours has proven its worth." A subtle warmth spread through Brandon, melting the familiar armor of self-doubt he had worn for so long. "I would need time to think," he said softly. "Of course," Aiko replied. "I would never rush you." But he added, "It sounds like a chance I never expected." Jenny beamed. "Then take it. Please." He took a long, steady breath. "I'll consider it. Truly. Aiko bowed her head slightly, acknowledging his sincerity. That is all I ask. The weight of possibility hung in the air, light but substantial hope taking form. After a moment, Jenny spoke again. What would Emma think, she asked gently. A small emotional smile touched Brandon's lips. She'd tell me to go for it, he admitted. She always tells me to try when I'm scared. Smart girl, Jenny said. The smartest, he murmured. Aiko watched them with a soft warmth that surprised even herself. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was undeniably human. Undeniably tender. She saw the way Jenny looked at Brandon with growing affection, with admiration, with something that could one day bloom into love. And she saw how Brandon looked back at her daughter with hesitation. Yes, but also with a quiet dawning protectiveness, the kind only good men carried. Aiko lifted her teacup. To new beginnings, she whispered. Brandon hesitated, then raised his cup. To new beginnings. Jenny clinked her cup gently against theirs. And to second chances. The sound of the cups touching was soft, but it reverberated like a promise that the night had shifted something forever. A promise that Brandon Hayes' life, once trapped in an endless cycle of loss and labor, might finally be opening towards something bright, something worthy. A chance for a new life. One he had earned the hard way. One he would soon discover he deserved. A month passed, but its quiet progression reshaped Brandon's life in ways far deeper than the passing of days. Spring had begun its gentle thaw over the city, softening winter's edges and bringing a hint of green to the parks where Emma played. It was subtle, almost shy, a whisper of renewal rather than a declaration. And in many ways, Brandon felt the same. The job offer Aiko had mentioned was no longer just an idea. Through her recommendation and the department's formal review, he had been accepted into the U.S.-Japan Military Cultural Exchange Division. His schedule became full training sessions, orientation meetings, interviews with Japanese and American officers who welcomed him with the polite curiosity reserved for someone whose past remained partly untold. Yet every time they asked about the Naha port incident, he merely bowed slightly, neither confirming nor embellishing. He didn't want recognition. He wanted purpose. And for the first time in years, he felt it. His daughter Emma was thriving. With the new salary, he had been able to move her into a better school, one with art programs she adored. She came home each day with drawings of oceans, ships, cherry blossoms, images of the world her father had carried within him long before she was born. "You look happier, Daddy," she said one morning at breakfast, swinging her legs beneath the table. "You smile more now." Brandon paused, touched by how effortlessly children speak truth. "Maybe I am," he answered softly. But he knew the truth ran deeper than the job, deeper than the money, deeper, even than the relief of saving their home. The truth was that certain people had stepped into his life on a cold night in New York and quietly begun healing things he had stopped believing could heal. The military exchange gala was held in a grand hall decorated with both Japanese and American flags. Lanterns hung overhead glowing like floating stars. Soft shamisen melodies blended with the low resonance of cello strings, a symbolic harmony between two worlds. Brandon adjusted the collar of his suit, the first new suit he'd owned in years. Emma had helped him pick the tie, a deep navy blue, that she insisted made him look like someone important. "Daddy, don't slouch," she whispered, now tugging at his sleeve as they stepped inside. "You're supposed to look confident." "I am confident," he chuckled. "Mostly." Emma grinned and brushed off his shoulders, as though polishing dignity back onto him with her hands. As they entered the hall, people turned, and for the first time Brandon didn't avert his eyes or shrink into the background. He wasn't here as a janitor or an unknown rescuer. He was here as a man standing at the start of a future he had once thought impossible. And then he saw them. Aiko stood near a display of traditional Japanese art. Graceful, elegant, her silver-streaked hair pinned neatly, her posture unmistakably that of a woman accustomed to command. But tonight, there was a softness to her expression, a calm that came from pride rather than duty. Beside her stood Jenny. She wore a familiar red dress, the same shade as the one she had worn the night they met. But tonight, it wasn't a symbol of frustration or embarrassment. Tonight, it was a quiet echo of something more tender, remembrance, gratitude possibility. Jenny turned, saw Brandon across the room, and her breath caught not with surprise, but with something gentler, warmer. A smile. Small. Real. Beautiful. Brandon's heart tightened, not with pain but with something he had forgotten how to feel hope. Aiko noticed him next, and her expression brightened with dignified warmth. Daddy Emma whispered, tugging at him excitedly. "They're waving at you." He felt heat rush to his cheeks, an old humility resurfacing, but Emma pushed him lightly from behind. "Go on. They're your friends." Friends. The word landed softly like a hand on his shoulder. He crossed the room, and when he reached them, he bowed gently to Aiko. "Aiko," he greeted. "It's good to see you. Your bow is still perfect," she said, smiling. "I would expect nothing less from you." Emma stepped forward, bowing shyly. Aiko bowed back, amused and charmed. Then Brandon turned to Jenny. She didn't bow. Instead, she stepped closer just enough that the small distance between them felt meaningful. "You look," she paused, eyes warming. "Different." "Good different?" he asked softly. "Very good," she whispered. Emma tugged his sleeve. "Dad got a fancy job," she announced proudly. Jenny laughed. "I heard. And I'm very proud of him." Brandon exhaled, humbled. "I'm still adjusting." Aiko placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You have stepped into a role many men with perfect resumes cannot handle. You have already proven your worth." He nodded, still not entirely used to praise delivered so openly. Jenny watched him carefully. "Does it feel real?" "Yet not fully," he admitted. "Some days I wake up expecting to mop floors again." Jenny took a breath, her voice softer. "You deserve better than the world gave you, Brandon. I hope you know that now." He looked at her longer than he intended. "I'm beginning to understand." Their eyes held for a moment, brief, charged, gentle. Aiko noticed, but said nothing, only smiling quietly to herself. Later in the evening, after speeches were given and guests mingled, Brandon stepped outside onto the terrace for a moment of fresh air. The night breeze carried faint traces of the ocean, imagined perhaps, but comforting. He leaned on the railing, letting the calm settle over him. Footsteps approached gently behind him. He didn't turn. "Beautiful night," he said softly. "It is," Jenny answered. She came to stand beside him, her red dress fluttering slightly in the breeze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Brandon said, "I didn't think I belonged in a place like this." Jenny smiled. "You belong wherever your heart leads you." He glanced at her. "I'm still learning how to believe that." "Well," she said softly, "let someone believe for you, until you can do it yourself." Something loosened in his chest, something long locked away. He looked back at the hall filled with lantern light, then down at the city glowing below them. "A new beginning," he murmured. Jenny nodded. "For all of us." He turned to her, and she to him. Not as a janitor and the daughter of an admiral, not as two people bound by circumstance, but as two hearts quietly meeting at the edge of something warm and possible. Inside, Aiko watched from the doorway, hands folded. Expression, tender, proud, and full of relief. She had lost much in her life: command, home, comrades, certainty. But tonight, she saw something she had not seen in a long time. Hope. And as Brandon and Jenny stood together beneath the lantern glow, she whispered soft enough, that only her heart could hear it. My daughter has chosen well. Thank you for staying with us through this story. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Our community comes from many places, and your presence truly means a lot to us. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the goodness still left in this world, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing healing, uplifting stories to you every week. And finally, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for watching, for listening, and for spending your time with us. We appreciate you more than you know. Until next time, take good care of yourself.